The speaker of this evening is Mr. Roger Malina, who is one of the most famous people in the cult.
In the cult.
And well, Roger is the co-chair of ITACCUS, of this committee for the cultural utilizations of space, and he's a distinguished professor at the University of Texas in Dallas. Yeah, so he's going to talk about something I haven't heard him say before, so it's going to be quite interesting.
The first one.
Yeah.
The first image.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. So, unlike Rob, I'm not going to give the same talk that I gave in Mexico City at Kosmica. I was working on this morning with Brona Ferrin. Is Brona still here? And so I have to blame her for the title of this talk. and so the title is, my talk is Data to Data, and unfortunately when you Google it, everybody's already used it, so we didn't come up with anything new this morning. But I guess I'd just like to pick up on Daniela's talk, which is, I think it's very unlikely actually that we're going to live on the moon and other bodies, and that we're likely to explore the universe through robots who send data back to us. And so I think it's interesting to think a little bit about what's happening to our culture at the moment, where we're becoming a data-giving culture. If you think how much data you take every day and send it to someone else, data has become a gift that we exchange with other people. And it's actually an interesting transition if you think over the last few decades. So not only are we a data-taking culture, but we're a data-giving culture. And so I want to talk today a little bit about space art as a data culture. And when I Googled it, not on Wikipedia, I found out that in Latin, data comes from the Latin word dare, to give. So ironically, the root of the word data is giving. So I don't know my Latin well enough, but someone should come up with the right word phrase: Homo faber, Homo sapiens, Homo data giving. And indeed, if there's one thing the space art community has been very interested in, it's actually taking data taken for other purposes and making non-scientific cultural objects out of them.
I think you should go to Homo Dat.
Homo Dat, there we go. Homo gave, is that what the Latin, Homo, that's the past of. And I just want to just mention that I'm going to give this talk tonight in honor of my father, Frank Malina, because it's the 100th anniversary of his birth this year. He was born on October 2nd, 1912. And for those of you who don't know what he did, he was a space rocket pioneer. That's my dad standing next to his rocket in White Sands, New Mexico, Rob, wherever you are.
Yeah, I'm here.
But he was also a space artist. And so someone here who's actually seen some of these works in our home. Some of you saw it last year. The kinetic paintings that he made, actually taking astronomical and scientific images and making artworks out of them. And so indeed he was a data-giving artist. And he was the co-founder of the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab and an aerospace company called Aerojet General Corporation. And so he's one of the pioneers in space culture, with a dual career in both engineering and the arts. One of his claims to fame is that he launched the first man-made object into space. Unfortunately, he had to launch it on top of the V2, so I guess this fits right into Daniela's theme of converting the dark side of technology into positive purposes. And indeed, when he reached 250 miles, which is actually the altitude that the space station typically orbits at, And his goal was to build a rocket to collect data above the Earth's atmosphere and bring that information back to the surface of the Earth. And so I have a nice personal connection to this data theme for tonight. And of course, one of the first major scientific discoveries that was made as soon as someone said something about the Earth's atmosphere was, of course, the discovery of the Van Allen belts, these belts of particles around the Earth that interfere with the radio signals because there is all this ionized plasma orbiting the Earth. And I think that just makes one of the points, which is we forget that we live on the surface of the Earth in this cocoon that protects us. It keeps most forms of light and radiation from reaching the surface of the Earth. The sky is full of X-rays. They never reach the surface of the Earth because the atmosphere shields us from us. From the Van Allen belts, we know that there are plasmas and high-energy particles around everywhere in space, but the atmosphere protects us. And so we're actually very blind on the surface of the Earth. And so I think one of the things that artists do is, in fact, by appropriating scientific data, they let us see things that are actually not within human capabilities. On the web, I found today's pictures of the sun in the ultraviolet. So again, this light never reaches the surface of the Earth. But now you can go on the web every day and you get today's picture of the sun in the ultraviolet. And you can see some of the explosions on the surface of the sun happening as we speak. Now, as you know, these explosions then send plasma all the way to the planet Earth, and they cause these amazing glowing storms over the surface of the Earth, which, of course, if you live in the Arctic zones, show up as auroras. And so we now understand this wonderful ballet between the surface of the sun and the surface of the Earth. And here's the aurora on Jupiter. It's not today, but indeed the other planets also had these beautiful auroras. Again, this is also an ultraviolet light, so Galileo could never have seen these even with good telescopes, because you cannot see these auroras from the surface of the Earth, because the ultraviolet is blocked by the upper atmosphere. And so my father, who was both a kinetic artist but a space artist, made it part of his artistic mission to take scientific landscapes and make them into artworks. And so I'm very pleased to say that one of the things our family has now done for 2 generations is championing the work of space artists as a totally appropriate use of space technology. And as was mentioned, it took us a lot of work with the space community to make them understand that this was just as legitimate as any other form of activity in space. My father wrote his first article on space art in 1970, so that's 42 years ago. I wrote my first article on space art in 1995, and so indeed we've been championing the work of this cult for quite a while. The Leonardo organization, and any bureau who's here somewhere, if she's not too cold, as she is at the back, we started the Leonardo Space Arts Working Group, and we started meeting in our living room in the early 1990s, and this was kind of pre-internet, so it was kind of difficult to find people. But the first time we held it, there were some of the people here were in our living room. I think you were, Frank. Yeah. And we started meeting, and by the 4th or 5th one, 100 people showed up, and so suddenly we realized it was no longer an obscure activity. It was a great moment. And then more recently, Nicola Triscutt and I founded the International Astronautics Federation Technical Activity Committee for the Cultural Utilization of Space. So it's a delight to see how the Kosmica thing has happened. In 1995, I did a kind of Cartesian typology of space art. And so my first type was space age art, which was space art that could not have been made before the space age. And so indeed, radio telescopes are an example of that, although they predate the space age. Art in space made to be viewed from Earth, and as you know, many artists began to create land art or very large-scale artworks on the surface of the Earth that could be either viewed from the Earth or viewed from space. And I guess Richard's dolphin is sort of in between those because the intended audience is not humans, I guess. But and so I defined these categories in this article in 1995, and I think in retrospect I'm missing a category, and so I don't know what I'm going to call it, space data art, which is indeed just looking at what's going on at the moment, where there's just so much interest in using data taken from space and then reformatting it, mashing it up, doing other things with it, making music with it. And I think that's a very interesting development in the last few years. I was just going to show a few images, but I'm a little bit out of time. But we're so familiar with these images that we forget that so much of it comes from things that are not visible from the surface of the Earth, or the night sky, the Earth viewed from orbit, and our light pollution problem. So that's what we're sending out into space. The simulations of the cosmic web, and I was talking to someone about the bubble theories of the universe. And then just to finish, as you all know, if you've been reading the blogosphere, we're in the big data era. This is the projection going up to 2030 of how much data is being generated on the planet Earth. And so just like many things that we do, we don't have limits to growth. And so indeed, our culture is becoming a data-generating civilization in a very fundamental sense. One of the next big astronomical telescopes being built in Hawaii will take a picture of the whole sky 3 times a night, and the camera is a CCD that's about 1/2 meter by 1/2 meter. So your camera has a CCD about this big in it, collecting images. This one has like 1 billion of those, or 1 million of those in an array. And when that telescope starts sending data out, nobody's going to be able to catch it. I mean, there's just so much of it, it's going to be a huge data flow. But if we think scientific instruments are generating huge amounts of data, if you just go look at what are the most important factors driving the growth of data globally, it's your goddamn cell phones. And so in fact, people are now just leaving their phones on all the time, sending stuff all the time, and it's growing at astronomical rates in a true sense. And so actually scientific data is not even in the top 5 generators of data today. It's all that video streaming you're doing, it's all the other data that you're generating. Anyway, so just to finish, to think of humans as data givers, I think is a nice idea. That indeed we become a data-taking civilization and now a data-giving one. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks so much, Roger. We have a couple of questions.
Someone fix my Latin. So,
yeah, I have a question.
Homo something.
Maybe I'm a bit slow here, Roger, but the Corporal, your father's rocket, was actually the first man-made object before.
Well, it depends on how you defend the V2 actually went high enough, but that doesn't really count because they were shooting for London. And as they went to London, they didn't reach outer space. It never reached space. And actually, some V2s were launched from White Sands before they put the White Corporal on top of it. So it was the first peaceful object to reach outer space.
So you would say that there were military objects in outer space?
Well, V2 got up to 59 miles, I think.
Really?
Which is beyond the definition of outer space as it's defined by space professionals.
Nice. So Von Braun did it first before you. Okay.
Well, but that was not his intention. He was trying to reach.
I would say after visiting Telemundo, that was his intention, but his sponsors had other views.
Well, okay, my father's sponsors were military first, but he got to work with Fritz Wicki and Van Allen and a lot of the people whose intentions were purely Pacific. So I'm not going to quibble on the first object in outer space, it's maybe not.
So I'm wondering, are you following your father's footsteps as far as painting and doing art?
No, well, I've been editing the Leonardo publications since he died in 1982. And so I guess most of my work has been collaborating with artists and championing the work of artists. So it's...
Well, it's a nice foundation that you jumped off up there.
Well, I'm just glad he wasn't running a machine gun factory. So I inherited something that was very wonderful. Unlike Werner von Braun, who was there defending Werner von Braun. He was a bad man.
Well, he's being held up as a role model, actually, on children's television in England now. He's one of the heroes, and he's been...
Yeah, him and the Nazi Walt Disney.
Oh, yeah, no, there's a children's TV program called Absolute Genius, where Von Braun is being presented to my 6-year-old son as a scientific hero, and this is the fact.
Well, you guys weren't in Huntsville, you
Were you in Huntsville?
You bet.
It was quite a gang, that German gang, wasn't it? And some of them got out of the Nuremberg trials because they were taken by the Americans. So they were exempted from the Nuremberg trials at the time. Rudolph and that whole crew. It was not a nice group of people.
Richard?
Roger, is your EUV instrument still in space?
No, the satellite that I led the team for re-entered in 1996, and it landed in the Indian Ocean somewhere. And we got an email from someone in Egypt claiming they saw it re-enter. But we think he was making it up. But we did not hit a camel anyway. And I think some of it did actually reach all the way to the ground. So you're quite right. A lot of space debris actually does end up hitting the surface of the Earth. Most of it burns up.
How long was your instrument in space?
From 91 to 96. It was at low Earth orbit, so it would re-enter during solar maximum.
So has nobody ever been wounded or anything by...
I think more people have been, airplanes sometimes drop frozen water from the toilets. I think more people have been wounded by airplanes dropping the toilet waste from satellites. And actually, every day there are about 1,000 or several thousand actually natural comets that hit the surface of the Earth. But most of them are water, so they just vaporize. They unlike the recent thing in Russia.
Yeah.
And so there's a continual flow of actually ice comets onto the surface of the Earth.
How do you finish with Daniela?
Because this was the
Well,
first moonbounce
it
image.
was the data-taking culture idea. So,
Well, Roger, I'm joking. Weren't you good Lieutenant Commander Data from Star Trek with your picture?
We
I'm
just
sorry?
don't know that they had
I'm joking.
yeah.
Weren't you good Lieutenant Commander Data from Star Trek in your picture?
I don't know. I
I
didn't do enough
think it's
Googling this
interesting
morning.
because in the Star Trek mythology, which is really connected to the space age and space race, I mean, really putting into the public, popular culture, a space vision, which is a space vision of peace, and at the same time, very imperialist vision of standing.
Human expansion, colonization.
Next frontier. The character of Data is interesting because he's a computer. And he's the only one able precisely to process the data necessary to travel into space and into the universe. So I think this character is
Seminal.
it's not trivial.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it is interesting how we become a data-taking culture, and that's one of the things people do all the time now, is collect data and send it to other people. Yeah.
You mentioned something you set up with Nicola at the end.
This committee.
So I was wondering, what do you think still is left to do? What is the ambition now in relationship to art and space?
Well, I think, like many of us, we're really interested in the civilian space activities. What's not at all clear to us is whether this will become a viable thing, although You know, if you asked Magellan that question, he probably would not have predicted what was going to happen. I mean, I think the real problem is, and I have differences with some of the people in this room. I mean, once you get above the Earth's atmosphere, it's such a hostile environment. It's not like just going to Antarctica and going a little bit further. I mean, you know, there are cosmic rays. I mean, you know, people were not designed for that environment. So it's such a hostile environment that the idea that we're going to send people to live there, it's not a, you know, and the science fiction literature is full of alternative scenarios. And so I think near-Earth orbit will be attractive for space tourism, I think. But I'm really skeptical of lunar space tourism. And even for, you know, asteroid mining and those kind of things, I think we'll do it with robots. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me to invest in the whole infrastructure you need so that people can live above the Earth's atmosphere.
You know, when you first started your talk and you showed an image of the atmosphere and
Yeah.
the ultraviolet rays bouncing off and stuff, my mind automatically goes to the ozone
Yeah.
and the destruction of that and the rays that are now coming in.
Yeah. Although that's, you know, well, it's that ultraviolet is very near ultraviolet. It's not far ultraviolet. So yeah, the ozone hole lets through.
But that's a process that's still happening and we don't know.
Well, the ozone hole is a little bit actually recovered in recent years.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's one of the best examples of the success of an international treaty, actually, in changing and controlling environmental damage. The ozone hole actually, I think, has been shrinking in recent last decade. But you know, the atmosphere blocks everything except a very, very narrow. I mean, when obviously human beings evolved to use the light that did get through the atmosphere, and so it's no accident that we see in this very narrow band that does get through the Earth's atmosphere.
Roger, I have a question which is kind of personal, but you've just gone from being a French public servant and an astronomer to becoming an American academic at the University of Texas. Well, what's your hopes for the future? How do you feel about that move?
I know, who was I talking to about the collapse of civilization? There was someone here talking about the collapse of, who was it? They've gone. Yeah, no, thank you. Fignola is gonna, what was the book you just read? By Michel Serres.
La Petite Poussette.
La Petite Poussette. And he's convinced, I mean, and you know, we just had a cocktail conversation, that we've gone beyond the limit of something that can be recovered, right? You want to just explain?
Yeah, but for many years, I was chairman of the education committee in the 90s.
Yeah.
And we used to run a yearly seminar.
Yeah.
And the last one, in 1997, was about large projects for the future. And we had people, 15 people from all over the world for the education community. And by unanimity, how do you see the future? Our answer was that all our political, social, and economic system go to a crash that's going to be big and unavoidable. Mm-hmm. And in the following day, but what do we tell people today? We say, don't waste your time trying to save or change the current system. Let it die. and all our energy, and we should tell the students also,
to build a new
work
system.
At a subsystem level, which is recommendation to students, do whatever you want, but do it the best you can, because that's how you will build yourself. And other systems, environment, which is, if you have decisions to make, don't try to find political or financial reasons, because you are most likely to be wrong if you do so. Try to look what will tend best to the survival of the species, survival of the planet, And when you have made the choice and decision, then you paint it right politically and or financially so that people will believe you.
Yeah. So that didn't quite answer the question, but I was on a panel.
No,
I was in a panel.
It does in terms that the current civilization that has been going since the Romans or even the Egyptians is just coming to an end, and it's not going to take hundreds of years. It's within our generation that the civilization is coming to an end.
Futurology is really good about the past and not very good about the future. So the problem is...
part of what you're talking about, like the 26,000-year cycle, and we're supposed to be entering a alignment.
But I mean, it's clear, for instance...
No. It's not that kind of cycle. It's more about evolution, that for before space age, I would say, our scope was a few hundred years, and hopefully a few thousand years. And now we can see in our past 1 billion years. And that makes a lot of difference.
So, I mean, actually, I was on a panel in Dallas, and I got a similar question. And I said, whoever put Dallas where Dallas is, put it in the wrong place. Because with global warming, you know, we already have 3 or 4 or 5 years of drought in Dallas. And so the farming that used to be a basic economy in North Texas, you know, in 20 years, 30 years, I mean, there's not going to be enough water for both the people and the cows. I mean, you know, and the people will win over the cows.
I'm not sure.
Sorry?
I'm not sure.
And so, I mean, really, we should be putting cities in places that make sense from a global warming point of view. So, you know, there's some parts of the planet that over the next 100 years...
This means you have to destroy half of the cities of the planet.
And we don't know...
They're all in the wrong places.
And we don't know how to do that, right? And we don't know how to do that as a society, right? So, you know, New Orleans was destroyed by a hurricane, by a huge storm. They're rebuilding in the same place, and it'll get flooded again. You know, and in southwestern France, where the storms flood all the housing developments in southwestern France, they're building again, and it'll get flooded again. So yeah, I mean, I think we don't know how to, and clearly our political systems are just incapable of dealing with planet-wide problems. So how did we get onto this topic? So, and unfortunately, you know, there's a mythology in our community about leaving the planet Earth, leaving the cradle, Tsiolkovsky, and that whole myth, Afrofuturism. And you know, we might send radio signals with our genetic coding out, but I don't think, you know, space colonies are a way of saving a few people.
But it has to beg the question then, is what is the relationship between the production of data and the generation of data and this?
And so, you know, I guess the question, and I have to go read Michel Serres' new book, is whether new emerging models can come out of all of this, and clearly information sharing is one of those things that's changed, right? So I have a student in my class in Dallas, actually, who's talking about how you would crowdsource a society after it collapsed. So how would you crowdsource rebuilding society after it collapsed? So what data should you save and then have lots of people keep it, so when an advanced civilization collapses, how would you have the information to rebuild it? And so, in fact, and you could imagine people doing data storage. I mean, the internet will collapse in that situation, right?
I think you have the better idea to let it go.
Well, as long as, yeah. Anyway, so...
Do we really want to save the blueprint?
Well, given that it was a blueprint for collapse, maybe not. I mean, you know, it's so depressing in the U.S., but it's the same in Europe, looking at the paralysis of the political system. And, you know, there are self-evident truths that somehow the best and the brightest, the most educated people in America can't agree on how to vote the budget, you know. I mean, it's just, and so you kind of wonder, when you're dealing with global climate change, how 157 countries are going to agree on what to do. so that the temperature doesn't keep going up.
Well, it's pretty cold in here now.
I think it's time for break. I think Paris is going to be okay with climate change. So keep living in Paris.
May I add a little thing?
Yes.
Is that many of these problems come from the fact that we are talking about them. And many of the problems are an artifact of language. And one way out is art.
Well, because it encapsulates, the imaginary and what life might be like. So
Non-language art.
That's brilliant,
okay.
because language is like a prison.
Yeah.
It really is.
Oh, that's why I had the cave painting. See, now you know.
There you go.
It was Moonbounce image.
Well, thank you so